Okay. Are we ready to restart, inshallah? Yeah. It's okay. Okay. Bismillah. So, based on some feedback, because not everyone attended the session yesterday, I'll give you a little bit of a background context to Europe, just so you understand who these people are or how they can be influential. So, up until about 1100, Europe had nobles, or up until about 1000, but 1100, Europe had nobles and peasants, and you had the church was the clergy, priests, bishops, who are educated by the church. The church developed special madrasas, you could say, called universities, to teach theology, to teach Christian doctrine to clergy members and others, but also to teach Roman law or canon law to people. And as society was changing, the economic system changed, they developed a middle class was created. People that were living in cities, wealthy merchants, merchant families, lawyers now, people arguing based on laws, right? For court cases, for disputes and properties. So it wasn't just simply, you go to your lord, the lord of an area, and he will sort it out for you. But there was an attempt to actually, because of cities got larger, and cities were not governed by lords exactly. The city might have a certain charter, certain, let's say, mini constitution that the king grants it. And if you live in a city, you're called a burger, not a beef burger or whatever, but a burger, the German term. And you had wealthy merchants, middle class craftsmen, artisans making things. So you had this middle class people who had a bit more money than they weren't poor, and they could afford to. There was no schools, of course. So if you were a wealthy merchant, you would train your children. You'd get a tutor. You'd get preferred teachers. So all these things were changing in Europe. A middle class was created, and in this middle class of lawyers, teachers, academics, these individuals, Hugo Grotius, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, they kind of filled that area there. They weren't, there were some who influential who were lords, but generally lords weren't not the intellectuals, right? The intellectuals were this middle class people. So these people are not random, they come out from nowhere, but these arise up as influential middle class. They, like Thomas Hobbes, was a tutor for a lord in France. He also was influential with actual lords who were in the House of Lords in England. So there was politicians, and people would consult him. And so with his influence and understanding of law and learning and academia, he was influential to other academics, to teachers, to other lawyers, but also to lords and those who had the ear of the nobles. So this is where he's influential, and all these other people are influential. This is where they are middle class, basically. And people often say that the middle class are often the change makers, the people that come up with the new ideas. So this is where they come from, right? This is where Thomas Hobbes is from. So he writes a book, and the book called Leviathan. He wrote other books, but Leviathan is the most popular one. It gets obviously the printing press is invented by this point in time. So just how IPCI uses leaflets, right, to spread obviously da'wah and haqq, they would use the printing press to make books, and the books become popular. But books are not read by the poor people, right, for the most part, because they can't afford it. But they're read by other middle class, right? People who read and who actually know how to read. A lot of poor people couldn't read anything, right? They can't read at this time. There wasn't that many literacy, but this is where it's influential. So this is where these people come from, and why people listen to them and give them the time of day is because these are influential, recognized academics and scholars. I'm trying to find an example. I mean, I suppose, okay, so you might know, let's say, a very infamous character, atheist guy called Richard Dawkins. You've probably heard of Richard Dawkins, an atheist guy in England. Some people say he's very obnoxious, but that's anyway. So why do you, he's just a scientist. He didn't win any Nobel Prizes for his science. He's not like an amazing scientist, okay? But he writes book. I'm from the middle class. I'm a scientist, and I'm writing a book that find how he writes nice. He has a nice accent when he speaks, whatever, right? So that's how influentials are made. I suppose that's where it comes from. So some people, they like what you write. Some people from a middle-class background, they are connected enough to get books published, and then people read those books. Because back then, there's no TV or radio, right? Yeah, so if you're middle class, you're going to be bored, right? You want some stimulation. You can go to the theater. So, you know, Shakespeare's plays, you know, Shakespeare has plays. You go to the theater. Maybe you can go, you know, to the pub, as they say, the bar or whatever you want to call it. The tavern, or you can read a book with new ideas, right? It might even be ideas you disagree with, but it's still interesting to read, right? So that's how these things happen. So just to give you a background, these people, where they come from, why they're influential. Okay, so Thomas Hobbes is called the father of modern Western political philosophy because he is the first, by modern, you mean materialist, right? So not based on revelation. And he's the father because he poses questions and makes arguments which will define the entire Enlightenment, the Western way of looking at politics, out of morality and ethics. That's why he says the father of modern Western political philosophy. But interestingly enough, there were things that that would become liberalism that he disagreed with. And in some ways, liberalism came about against him, reacting to him. And one of the key ideas, so I mentioned individualism, the idea that, well, he wasn't really individualistic, but he basically argued that humans exist in the wild. In nature, they're just individuals, and they create government, which is not natural, but they create it to protect each other from each other, right? To protect themselves, sorry, more precisely, because they're selfish. So government is about selfishness. Let's make government, not because I care about you. I don't care about you. I care about myself. So I'm going to make government. Let's all agree. We make government so that you don't steal from me and I don't steal from you, right? That's basically. And some people say a lot of where his argument comes from is because in the English Civil War, when English power broke down, you had outlaws and criminals and brigands who would rob people on the streets. I mean, I know that South Africa has a bit of a current problem with that at the moment, and you can understand, right, where Thomas Hobbes is coming from. But it was worse in England, where anyone, if you had a weapon, you could go into a village or town, maybe, or at least a house, and kill the occupants, rape the women, take whatever jewelry you can find or possessions, and that's it, easy. So he thought that without government, look what happens without government. Civil war, destruction. And he thought people went back to nature without government. So he thought the Civil War, when its worst areas in the Civil War, that was natural, right? So people robbing you on the street, killing you, raping you, what have you, is natural without government. That's where he's coming from, even though it's not natural. So he says that, and he says happiness is constant pleasure, sensory pleasure, enjoyment for eating, reproduction, and intimacy, and all this stuff. Okay, those two ideas define the West. They go now to define the West. But there was one idea that doesn't. And there's one idea that's actually quite familiar to you. You've heard it before. He said, civil war is so bad. If I set up this now, civil war is so bad that anything is better than civil war. Anything. It doesn't matter if you have a crazy tyrant leader. He kills you, he rapes you, he massacres even people, the portion of the population. It's still in civil war. Right? So no matter what, do not rebel against the ruler or go against him at all whatsoever, no matter what he does. Sound familiar? Right? And it's dangerous because that would lead to liberalism, right? He didn't intend it. But what would happen later, one of his students, not his direct student, but someone reading, he's a fan of his, would respond to him, and that would create liberalism. Right? The idea that you should obey the ruler no matter what, that created liberalism. That's why I'm against, that motivates me extra against the Madakhila, because I actually see where it's going, because I've seen it before in the history books, right? It goes to a very dark place. So, and he says, and he has an argument for this. He gives an argument as well. Another argument, he says, well, look, technically the ruler is there by your consent anyway, so he kind of represents you. So if the ruler kills you, oppresses you, that's really you oppressing yourself. Right? He gives these arguments, but he argues that the ruler represents you, that look, your ancestors gave bay'ah to the ruler, to the ruler's father's 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 father. So in a way, the ruler is, they agreed to the system, there's consent, there's bay'ah. So really, it still represents you, even if you didn't elect the ruler, right? So he gives his argument, the ruler represents you, is your representative. That was one of his big ideas. It would be changed a bit to democracy. He didn't, now he knew about democracy, but he understood democracy differently than you understand it today. Democracy was one of three types of government that the Enlightenment thinkers knew about. One was autocracy or monarchy, one guy rules. One is oligarchy, a bunch of guys rule, a council rule. And the other one is democracy. Everybody rules, but not you elect someone. No. Real actual democracy, original democracy. Everyone votes on the laws. Everyone votes on the court cases, although in ancient Athens, technically it was the older people that voted on the court cases. But anyway, so everybody votes, right, on everything, right? That's democracy. So that's what he argued. Because these are three types of government. He said it doesn't matter what type of government you have, you just can't rebel against the ruler, whatever type of government it is. It still represents you, even if it's one guy or a group of guys or everybody, it still represents you. That's his argument. Now, the thing you've been waiting for, the creation of secularism. Now, what I've been trying to do in this course is not just tell you where these things came from, but I'm trying to tell you why they were justified. Because they were justified based on the historical circumstance of the West. And you are going to hear these justifications from the youth who've adopted these ideas, because they repeat them. So he notices that a man cannot have two masters, right? There's a similar verse in the Quran that says the same thing, but there's also an Arabic expression, which is a horse cannot have two saddles, right? And in the Bible, there's another expression, similar expression, a man cannot have two masters. So if you're in a government, so you're in a state, you have to obey the king and obey the church, but the church is not the king. What do you do when they conflict with each other? Civil war, fighting, problems. So he had a solution to this, which is government is something that comes naturally from the people, okay? It's in some ways, right? Even if you had anarchy, you'd have gangs would rise up where there's no police. Gangs rise up with gang leaders, right? It's natural to arise. Organizations arise naturally. So he says, well, if it comes naturally, then the hierarchy, the organizations, the power structure is the power structure. It's a simple argument. Why bring the church into it? It's not natural to fit the church into this, right? It's not natural. This is what's causing the problem, he says, is you're trying to put two separate things. But this is a problem of Christianity, because in Islam, the Jama'ah and the state is the same. The head of the Jama'ah is the head of government. It's the Khalifa or Imam. The Imam of the Jama'ah, the Muslims that have come together, is the state. So for us to say we must separate the Jama'ah from the state, it's like, what? Separate ourselves from ourselves? Doesn't make any sense. But in Christianity, because of their historical, the historical accidents that made that religion, the church is the head of the Jama'ah, but the king is the head of a portion of the Jama'ah in the worldly affairs. So, but then in the worldly affairs, does the church get to decide, or can it interfere in that? Because it's very confusing. So instead, Thomas Hobbes said, simple solution, separate Jama'ah from state, which is the Christian church. Yes, you can believe in the Catholic Church if you want to, and that's fine. But you owe the Pope no allegiance at all in anything that the king doesn't allow you, right? So you obey the king first. That's the natural power structure. Radical idea. You're not encouraged to have girlfriends. You're not encouraged to drink. You're not encouraged to take drugs or what have you. You're not encouraged. You're not made to feel that there's something wrong with you, that you're a virgin, right? Or something wrong with you. What's wrong with you? If you're a virgin, what's wrong with you, right? No. Say, alhamdulillah, you stayed away from zina. Yeah, that's something right with you. So Islam, this is where the mercy of Islam is, right? Create a society that allows you to fulfill your human nature. So in that society, if you still sin, that's on you fully, right? That's just you really wanted to sin, because there's no encouragements to do that. Understand? All right. Okay. So that's secularism, the idea that government is not legitimate or false because it's not on the right aqidah, and the government is government because it's true. It's your government, not because God says so, because it's just your government, right? That is the beginning of secularism, right? So now let me introduce John Locke. John Locke was very influential in British government. He worked in Parliament. He was also a lawyer and, of course, a philosopher. And he decided to write against this guy, Robert Filmer, who was arguing that the state represents the church, represents the hierarchy of mankind. So the leader is the descendant of Adam alayhi salam as being a leader of mankind, the head of mankind, and everyone in the state must worship God, and the state represents this to God, and so it's the Bible that establishes the authority of the state. So he was arguing against these materialists, right? He was arguing against it, and John Locke also argues against Thomas Hobbes, and that John Locke is the father of liberalism. He created liberalism, you could say. Now, technically, he really just took a whole bunch of ideas that were popping up around him, but he's the first person that brought it all together into a single book, you could say, or books anyway. His famous 2 treatises of government. So this guy makes liberalism, and he creates it by responding to Thomas Hobbes, saying, you're wrong, Hobbes, and to Robert Filmer, saying, you're also wrong too. So what does he say to Thomas Hobbes that is wrong? He said, look, Thomas, you say that before government, we were in a natural state of freedom, and humans gave that up to go into government to protect themselves from each other's violence. Okay, what's the point of that if they've gone into a government only for the government to be violent to them? What's the point then? Right? I swap dictators for one big crazy dictator. Why should I do that? Point of government then, right? That was his big response, refutation of Thomas Hobbes. You can't have a government that can do whatever it wants. He said that the government makes you their property then. You're the property of the king who can kill you whenever he wants, right? Then you're his slave. So he argues that no, that can't happen. The government must be limited in order for you to be free. Right? The government can't be able to be unlimited, absolute power. It's limited. And that's the big idea, you could say. Everything else he borrows from Thomas Hobbes. Happiness is the pursuit of pleasure. I'll take that. Freedom is the ability to do whatever you want, which is mubah, which is permissible. I'll do that. I'll take that. But then he says, okay, so how do you make a limited government? He says, okay, the law that is created is one that must apply to everybody. Right? And ideally, the more freedom you can give, the better. And that was it. That was all he said. Right? He might be against prostitution. He might say prostitution should be banned, maybe. But that's fine. Ban it, don't ban it, as long as it applies to everybody. So if the king makes a law, it applies to him as well. Right? So if the king wants to murder people, he can't then say that murder is outlawed, because then he has to stick to that law himself. That's his idea. The law applies to everyone. Now, this is an Islamic idea, but it didn't come from Islam. It's just came up with the idea himself, which is the law applies to everybody. The caliph has to be under the same law as everybody else. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, if his own daughter was to steal, he would amputate her hand, right, as punishment. So no one's above the law in Islam. Right? So that's, in a way, that's the beginning of liberalism. He argues the same thing in a letter called A Letter on Toleration on the top there. That was his famous one of his famous letters or works, where he says that the government should not enforce a particular aqidah because it doesn't work. You can't save people's souls. It's not. People should decide for themselves what aqidah they're going to follow, right? But he makes 3 exceptions. One, not Catholics, right? Don't tolerate Catholics, because Catholics, they obey a foreign ruler, the Pope. So you can't trust them. So they don't deserve a right to be tolerated. The father of liberalism. He also said Muslims don't have a right to be tolerated either, because they follow a foreign leader, the Caliph of Islam, which was existed back then, or the Sheikh al-Islam, who is controlled by the Caliph. That's what he said. There's a third category of people that should not be tolerated, he said, and you're surprised by this, but he actually said it, atheists. Because he said that atheists don't believe in any morals, or good and bad, and so you can't trust them. So he argued that, yeah, people you can't trust, don't tolerate them, but people you can trust, like other Protestants, as long as they obey the leader, that's fine. You can trust them. You should tolerate them, right? So most people don't realize the dark side of John Locke. He also justified slavery, funnily enough. You might find this surprising, but he did. He argued, and he actually owned territories in North America that had slaves on it, so maybe he had a reason for it. But anyway, he said slaves are the captives of war, right? So I capture you, I'm going to kill you. And you say, no, don't kill me, I'll do what you want. I'll obey you. Just don't kill me. Say, all right, well, I can kill you because it's war, but I'm going to put a pause on that as long as you do what I want. Okay, that's fine then, right? But if you have the choice to say no to me, as a slave, you have a choice to say no to me as a slave. But if you do, I'll go back to what I was going to do before, right? Because I was meant to kill you. That's how John Locke argues slavery is allowed, right? That slavery is allowed because they're prisoners of war. But there's a little problem with how it was applied to West Africans who were enslaved and taken to North America to work on the farms, which is they weren't. Sure, it started out that they were prisoners of war. So basically, the Europeans went to West Africa. Now, what most people don't tell you is they never actually conquered West Africa initially. They opened up a trade post, yes, but they just said, they wanted to see what they had to sell. And these West African kingdoms, they fought with tribes, other tribes and other nations, and they beat them and they took them as slaves. So they said, well, we can sell you slaves we've taken in our wars. And then the British found, those Native Americans, they die a lot. They die from our diseases, from European diseases. They're not strong. These guys seem much stronger than the Native Americans. We can use these people to work on our farms. Okay, we have all this gold from Native America we found, so we'll give you lots of gold and money, and well, usually we'll just give you lots of manufactured goods from forks and spoons and whatever. But anyway, we'll give you that. You give us slaves, and that's it. And that's what happened. The West African kingdoms were the ones who sold the slaves to the Europeans. The Europeans didn't invade West Africa initially, right? For a good few hundred years, they just bought it. They bought the slaves. And then the West African kingdoms became very rich, right? Became very rich on slavery. So they ran out, so they had to then find more. Then soon people were being hijacked off the street, you could say, even in their kingdoms, to be sold to the Europeans because there was a lot of money in that, right? So it was lucrative. But they weren't prisoners of war. They were kidnapped, many of them. They weren't prisoners of war. So anyway, but John Locke justified it in that way. And that's how liberalism, you could say, justified slavery at the very beginning. But soon they would have to change that doctrine a little bit to continue slavery. But anyway, this is John Locke. And this is where you see the beginning of the Aqidah of liberalism fully fleshed out. The formula, the Shahada, you could say, the Shahadatain of liberalism is fleshed out here. Man in the state of nature is the absolute lord of his own person and possessions, equal to the greatest and subject to nobody, all being kings as much as he, every man his equal. Right? Have you ever heard some of the youth say, "Yes, queen, go queen," or "You've dropped your crown, sir. You're a king," right? This is from individualism. So this is the Aqidah. This is the core Aqidah of the Enlightenment. This will change everything. Every human individual owns themselves. They are your own God. You are your own God according to this. Okay. Now, John Locke was not atheist, but he's Christian, actually. He even wrote a book called The Reasonableness of Christianity, or something like approximate to that. So he wrote something. He was actually even, although he disagreed with some doctrines of Christianity, strangely, but we won't go into that today. But he somehow reconciled it, saying, well, look, yeah, I know that God made you and you should obey God, yes, but we have to look at it from the natural world, yeah? What does nature say about you? Not God, nature. Because we can't agree about God from the Bible.